Thanks for just sticking with us as we completely interrupt Aykroyd to do a random holiday episode not in the holidays. We're having a lot of fun. So and actually, I think the way we're going to do this is each episode, I think will be a day, right? A day in December, just like the book is organized. Really quickly before we start, if you hear little munching sounds, that is 1 or 2 dogs chewing on some Himalayan cheese chews. So think of it as a crackling fire, maybe. Mm-hmm. And if it's really loud, we'll put a crackling fire underneath the audio. Right. That's our solution.
And you can play is that the fire? Is that the chew? It's great.
Is it little tiny dog teeth? Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else before we dive in?
Yeah. The thing that we normally do at the beginning of the first debrief of a book is we give away who the murderer is. And we're not going to do that this time because, well, that's all we'll say.
There's an intention behind it, behind our decision, I guess.
Yes. Hours of thought, hours of conversation.
A lot of going back and forth.
Yeah, we both were doing our impressions of that sculpture, The Thinker.
And this is the decision we came to.
Yep.
Okay. Let's travel to December 22nd, back in time. We're in London. And this story is narrated similarly to Halloween Party, for the people who've been listening for a while. It is in third person, and if we're going in the chronological order, so we've done Styles, Lynx, and we're halfway through Aykroyd. Those are all first person narrators. We either have Hastings or Dr. Shepherd. And it really helps because this story has a lot of gossip, where there's a lot of people talking about each other. And we need to be able to see all those conversations. And there's no good person to be there for everything.
It's also a really great way to introduce so many important characters so quickly.
Yeah. It's definitely a dark story. There is this almost plucky, upbeat feeling to it because we're just bouncing around. So let's jump into our first scene. December 22nd is kind of broken up into a few different locations. And we start on a train. And this kind of reminds me of Lynx a little bit, except we don't get the weird quote at the beginning. We just get a man on a train platform. And we learn his name is Stephen in the first sentence. We learn right away he's from South Africa, or he's recently been in South Africa. And he's kind of looking at the scenery around him. And she's building the setting through his eyes. And he's London is so dirty and so foggy. He says, what a foul country. What a foul city. He is displeased. And it's very different than what we might think of as a quaint British Christmas story that's in the Cotswolds or something like that. No, this is going to be a grimy story. London through Stephen's eyes, at least. He's oh my God, I'm having that angst of coming back home for Christmas.
In my brain, at least, it started to beg the question of then, why are you coming back here?
What would take him away from the life he loves? So just as soon as he's oh, everybody sucks, he sees a girl. And she has dark hair and, quote, sad, proud eyes of the South. He literally is she is exotic.
Yes, yes.
So this is a total stereotype of Spain. Just all of his little British worldviews are coming out. And he's imagine her in the heat and she's wearing black lace and she must be from such an interesting place. So she has captured his imagination. And he's feeling Hastingsy in the moment, I'd say.
He feels to me like a more confident, spoiled Hastings. When Hastings is falling in love with his friend's wife or whatever, there's always this sense of, will she have me? And this guy's just
I will have her. There's a lot of mysteriousness. These two people who don't belong in the sea of gray there's some attraction there, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, she really doesn't look like she belongs here. He notices she's wearing cheap clothes. And so he's like, what is she doing here? Kind of like we were saying about Stephen. What is bringing them to this place that they stick out so much? And then we get the woman's perspective. I just think this is so fun. We haven't had any like people checking each other out. This feels more advanced.
This is an incredibly thrilling opening.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting this like shift in perspective, all this stuff. This feels like action
because
they're hitting on each other and they're finding out about each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it just has this feel to it that the other books don't have.
Yeah, there's this like energy and intrigue right away. I feel like a lot of the books we've read, it takes a while for the intrigue to even start.
Yes.
And so we learn right away that this woman's name is Pilar, or Pilar, I guess. We know right away she's probably from Spain. And she's like, oh, I hate British people too. They stink. Little do they know they're having the same thoughts. And so she sees Stephen and she's like, ooh, who is this guy? And we kind of learn right away that she's a little formidable. And it's interesting because we're a little in her head, but we're also looking at her too. We're getting a description. It's not quite in her head. And it says the curve of Pilar's red mouth curved upwards. It was suddenly cruel, that mouth, cruel and greedy, like the mouth of a child or a kitten, a mouth that knew only its own desires, and that was as yet unaware of pity. Woo! We're like, this woman is dangerous.
Love this, that it's such a striking character physically, but then also potentially not a very nice person.
Mm-hmm.
And love to see that right out of the gate.
It's so interesting. We get a lot of equating her to a child. Like Stephen will do this and she will, but just in the sense of like the impulses. And I think that some of that is the stereotype of the impulsive, more emotional person of the European South. There's that like cliche.
Not repressed.
Yeah, she's like following her impulses in her heart or her desires. She's talking about how like wealthy everyone is in England. She's looking around, but she's like, they're not happy. They're like so unhappy with their lives. Then she notices this man who has a bronzed face, not like the other sad, pale people around them. And she's like, oh my God, he's checking me out too. I kind of like this.
Right.
So this like connection happens right away. And she realizes, she kind of notices, she's like, he's too alive to be English. So they're both like these people living on this whole other plane. There's a lot of like, I'd say like innuendo or tension in their discussion.
The feel that I had for it, not to get too off track, so to speak, is that it would be believable if these two characters are like, hey, actually, let's get off at the next stop and go have some fun, right?
Yeah.
Like there is this feeling of that that could happen, but they're both driven, by what they're there to do. But there is also that feeling of like impulsiveness.
Yeah, exactly. Then we start to learn a little bit through like them getting to know each other and asking each other questions. And we learned that Pilar is from Spain. She's half Spanish. Her mother was English. And then he kind of starts asking her like, what is it like to be in Spain with this? He's like, this war business. She almost like boasts about how violent it is and kind of how dangerous her life is. She's like, all across the country, there was so much destruction. I saw a bomb drop and it blew up a car. Yes, another destroyed a house. It was very exciting. And then she was like, but it was a nuisance too because the driver of my car was killed. We get that evil sense or that like selfish sense. There's all this tragedy going on, but she's like, it's exciting if it's happening to other people, but if it inconveniences me in the slightest way, then I'm like sad about it, Right. There are a lot of themes introduced in this day, and she definitely introduces like violence and death. And so she says, everyone must die. That is so, is it not? If it comes quickly from the sky, boof, like that. It is as well as any other way. One is alive for a time, yes, and then one is dead. And that is what happens in the world. We're learning a lot about her and her worldview right away. Stephen is like, so do you forgive your enemies? Because she's like, I'm not a pacifist. And she was like, if I have an enemy, if anyone hated me and I hated them, I would cut my enemy's throat like this. And she made a graphic gesture. So Yeah.
Yeah.
She's into violence. She's not upset about it.
My pickup line in college was, "So do you forgive your enemies?" It's so incredibly tense because these questions they're asking each other and the answers you're getting are not what you would normally get.
Mm-mm.
And this all gets to the point that you had made in the pre-read, which is that I believe there was one scholar or critic had said, keep an eye out on this almost being like incredibly heightened.
Mm-hmm. Like a caricature. Yeah.
We start to see it this early.
When I read this, I always think of her as like a little silly. She's trying to prove herself so much. She's trying to create this persona that it's like, you are trying so hard. A lot of information up front about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
We get kind of towards the end of this scene, a little bit of that vagueness, that fun foreshadowing. Is she playing with me? And so Stephen is like, you are a bloodthirsty woman. And she's like, well, what would you do to your enemy? And all he says is, I wonder. It's leading us to think like, oh, are we going to find out? And then kind of the mysterious thing is he sees her little luggage label and it says Gorston Hall is where she's going. And he's like, And that's all we get is the But then, so exciting, cut to Gorston Hall. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
There's like these pairs we get introduced to, and then that's kind of like shaken up at the end. All these people are so funny. And I actually think like the gender stuff is really interesting. Like we get these couples and like the relationship between the men and the women and their roles is super fascinating. So we get Alfred Lee and his wife Lydia, and we're told right away they're discussing their Christmas plans. Alfred is middle-aged, he's quiet, he has a gentle face, and Lydia is energetic and lean like a greyhound. He's not very formidable, he's kind of quiet, and we get the sense that like Lydia is the one who's like feisty. We jump in mid-conversation, we don't really know what they're talking about, but we start to get a sense of the family dynamic right away. Alfred is like, my father insists we have to do it this way. He expects to have his own way. And so we start to learn that like Alfred is kind of under the power of his father. And Lydia is like, you have to make a stand. She calls his father tyrannical. And she's like, we can't make any decisions of our own. And we start to learn that the father, the absent father here, provides for them financially. And then the Christmas plans come up again. And this is equally tense. And they start to mention Alfred's brother, David. Will he come? And so we get the sense of like, oh, what does it mean if this mysterious brother, David, joins? And so we learn a little bit about him, that he's like the family outsider. He hasn't visited the house in many years, and that like a visit from him would be really surprising. We learn that David was devoted to Alfred's mother. So we kind of wonder like, oh, what happened there? And I had to note, they're like, he's dreamy and a musician. And I was like, oh, he's a Pisces. I was like, classic male Pisces. But we learned that like the father was hard on him, and we learned that his wife is named Hilda.
Right. And it's fascinating to start out with Alfred and Lydia because they're in the place where everyone is coming to. And so we're getting their descriptions of all of these other people before we get into the heads of those people. So it's just like such a great setup.
There's some really unique tension about if you're about to host something and you don't know who's coming.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of family dynamics, that is so stressful to be like, who's coming to our house? Who do we have to entertain? What kind of like weird, deep-seated family issues do we have to like navigate around? I think that's where Lydia is just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And then also this gives us, if we're looking for like what makes people suspicious right away, this tension that they're trapped by the father. What a good reason to kill the father. Then we learn about there are many siblings. Like this isn't even half of them. We learn about George. So we've got 3 brothers so far, and his wife Magdalene. And we learn that like Magdalene is like 20 years younger than George. So there's like a lot of gossip around that. And Alfred is like, ugh, George is such a fool. He married someone so young. But Lydia's like, actually, Magdalene does a lot for him politically. She like garners support for his people. So she was like, Magdalene has a purpose.
And we also get like this shading then of Alfred. What a kind of weasel.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
He's still living at home, and he's not taking his wife seriously with her concerns.
Yeah.
He's just got this thing where he's passing judgment and assuming that he's always correct.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, yeah, no.
Totally the kind of thing where like the person cannot see their flaws as they're judging everyone else. We also get a sense that he's like maybe a mooch.
Right. And also the price that a couple would pay in that situation, constantly just trying to decide, is the financial and the house stuff worth being here?
Ugh. It's intense. Like, there could be a whole movie about this, or a whole book about this. The conversation, though, it's really interesting. This is where I'm like, the dynamics are introduced, but also these themes. The conversation kind of leads to this discussion of evil and whether you should be like suspicious of people. And Alfred, his stance, they kind of get into this little debate, this philosophical debate. And his stance is like, the world is what you make of it, which is kind of interesting coming from him. He's like, you can choose to perceive someone as evil. And I think it's about the father a little bit, right? You can perceive my father as tyrannical, or you can see him as this. And it's kind of like, your perspective is your fault. And Lydia is like, no, evil is not in your mind. It exists. And she's like, I've always felt it here in this house. So again, we get this sense of foreboding. This is a dark start to a story. This is not quaint. This isn't cheery. They're in this like evil house with these like very messed up family dynamics. Merry Christmas.
Yep. Merry Christmas.
We get introduced to a caretaker kind of nurse figure for the father, whose name is Hornbury. And he kind of arrives in a spooky way. They're talking, and then Lydia just like looks over Alfred's shoulder, and there's this like guy in the shadows. She's like, "Oh, we got to stop talking." He's described as a dark man with a smooth face. So I'm not sure if we're supposed to think of that as like a racial description or if he's just like a shadowy person. I couldn't really tell. But they describe him as creeping about the house like a cat, and no one hears him coming. That is even more unsettling. The house is evil, and there's this shadowy guy who just kind of creeps around. We're not introduced to the father right away. We're introduced to his like emissary, his lackey. And so that also gives us an idea about like what the dynamics are, that maybe they see Hornbury way more than they see the father. And Hornbury is like, hey, I just have to tell you, Mr. Lee wants you to know that there are going to be 2 more guests at the party, a man and a young lady. And so we can already think, well, we just met a man and a young lady on the train, and one of them was going to Gorston Hall. So we start to think, oh, we've probably met these 2 people.
Right. What would be the point of meeting Stephen if he wasn't also coming along?
Just to like trash the sadness of the British scenery.
We get his thoughts on modern day London, and then he never shows up again.
Yeah.
Also, I just like quick shout out to an amazing character being Hornbury, who for so much of this book, we're supposed to be suspicious of him, but he is also the captain of exposition.
Oh, yeah.
And it takes a little while to be like, oh, that's
why he's here. That's such a great observation. Like, what is his role? Why is he here? He tells us really important things about the plot.
Right.
Oh my gosh. So we already get this like kind of wrench in their plans. Who are these new people? And Lydia kind of guesses, she's like, you know what? Your dad is really bored. And I think he's bringing these people in to like cause some kind of chaos or cause us some kind of unpleasantness so that he can be entertained.
The feeling that you get is that Mr. Lee really enjoys making people feel uncomfortable.
Really relishes in it. And we learn that like he is an invalid. We don't really know anything beyond that. And that's why he might want to be entertained, is because he used to lead this really adventurous life, but now he's like bored and stuck inside. So he just loves watching people be miserable. What a great guy.
Yep.
And then we learn too a little bit about the mother, that she was always ill, and Alfred describes her as having no spirit, which isn't, that's your mom.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to say about your mother who's passed, right?
And so Lydia's like, cool, okay, I'm going to go outside. And we get introduced to her garden. Wow. This is so weird. And I love it.
This is this book's version of the magical
Totally.
nature,
Yeah.
right? But it's so manufactured. It's so great.
Yeah. And this family, they don't have access to the magic of nature. They have to create their own sad versions because she's literally stuck. She can't go anywhere. And actually, I hadn't thought about this, that she like makes all the places that she probably wants to go, which is very sad. Poor Lydia. She has these stone sinks and they're filled with these little like miniature scenes. And I was like, what is a stone sink? And so I Googled it. And basically, we would call them now like stone plant troughs. And so they're just kind of like low troughs where you would put a raised flower bed or something like that, but made of stone. It's very like British countryside-y.
Mm-hmm.
I just have to share some of the things that we see. So one is like this little Middle Eastern desert scene, and another one is an Arctic scene with penguins, like little tiny penguins. And then there's like a Japanese garden. And we learned that like the scene she's currently working on is the Dead Sea. And Alfred is like, it doesn't look attractive. And she's like, it's not supposed to be, it's dead. And so Alfred he doesn't get it. He kind of sucks. We're introduced to another person in the household, which is the old butler Tressilian, which is such a great name. And we learn that he's been in the family for over 40 years. So he's like the old-fashioned version of a devoted butler. We had Hornbury. He's sneaking around. He's shadowy. Well, this is the unsavory part of him, is he's so devoted to the family. His devotion, she's like, it could kind of be perverted. So she's like, he's so devoted to the family that he'd lie himself blue to the face to protect the family.
First of all, Tressilian is a great name for like a prog rock band. That's just amazing. You get the feeling now that between Mr. Lee, Tressilian, and Hornbury, those people are the power structure.
Yeah.
They're the ones that know what's going on. You almost feel even sorrier for Lydia.
Yeah. She's just trapped. We end kind of there and we go to another couple. We cut to David. So he's the sensitive, I was going to say sensitive, mother-loving sibling. But that's who he is with his wife, Hilda.
Yeah.
And we also get a little portrait of him. No surprise, David is like boyish. So we can get the sense that he's maybe a little like a wet blanket as well. Hilda, on the other hand, she has this kind of contrasting description. She's described as like a person in a Dutch picture, which is, I think, a way of saying she's sturdy and like of the earth. And she's called overstout and dumpy. But she also has a hidden strength and she exudes force. So she's an interesting, complex lady. Just like we were thrown into a conversation in the other one, we're thrown into David is reading a letter. We don't know what it is yet. And Hilda is watching him. And she's like, I could probably influence his decision, but I'm not going to. I'm going to like see what he says. She speaks to him as if she were a nanny in a nursery. Neither one of these relationships is happy, I would say, or functional.
There's a weird thing in this book, which I don't hate, which is that most of the couples seem like the most miserable people.
Yeah, no one is happy. But then David mentions how he hates going home. He hates his past. He remembers how his mother suffered and she was so sweet, yet she had this life of suffering. And he says, like, my father just brought misery into her life. And we learn also that Mr. Lee was unfaithful to her, and that really humiliated the mother. We kind of have a feeling that the letter he's reading is probably an invitation to Gorston Hall. We kind of get a parallel of the situation with Lydia and Alfred, where I do think there's a little bit kind of towards the end of their scene where she's like, you need to see your mother and your father in this different light. This is in your head. You are thinking about this situation as a child because you experienced as a child and you've turned your father into this monster and you need to like reassess and see your father as an adult. It really is that parallel. I hadn't really realized that, where she's like, no, the evil is in your head. And David is like, no, evil is evil. We also get some helpful exposition about the brothers and the family dynamics. We understand that the mother died when she was really young and David blames the father and he broke away from it all. And I guess David was supposed to be the one who like took over the family business. And Alfred was supposed to join the army, which I think is interesting. Like, would Alfred be more of a manly man had he not had to come home and like take care of the family business? So there's like some resentfulness there. There's some what could have been. And then we learned that another brother, so this is 4 siblings now. Don't worry, there's more. His name was Harry, and he was also supposed to join the company too, just like David. And Harry messed everything up because he was wild. He didn't follow any of the rules. He stole some of the business money, and he was like, I'm not made for this. I'm going to see the world. He's our bad boy.
This might not be the best analogy, but if we think about Mr. Lee as being the son, and all of his kids are different planets that are revolving around Mr. Lee.
I'm really enjoying this. Yes.
The way that Agatha Christie describes or has a character describe David makes you think that he's the one that's kind of furthest out.
Yeah.
He's the artist. He's sensitive. He's the one that now we're finding out is like so angry at his dad. So that's the one you think is going to be furthest from the sun. But then all of a sudden we learn that Harry is like, oh my God, Pluto exists.
Yeah.
It's all the way out there, right?
I love that. It's that he's the surprise Pluto. Well, it's funny though, because he's not as far away as you'd think. I love this too. The exposition, it needs to happen. But I kept writing, it really doesn't seem like these couples know each other at all, because they're like having to explain their childhoods and things like that. It's for our benefit, but it is very artificial. It'd be like if my husband was like, and I actually have some more siblings and I need to tell you about them. And it's like, well, I'm surprised that didn't come up sooner. Thanks for sharing that with me now.
As you're reading this invitation, thanks for filling me in. Yeah, exactly.
But the funny thing is Hilda is like, because she's clueless, she's like, well, so you've never heard from Harry again. And he was like, no. Harry would get in touch and ask for money. So I love that too. Like, he can't even go off and be a bad boy because he can't really support himself. So he is still beholden to the dad a little bit.
Yes, absolutely.
So then we get a little bit more about the letter. And the letter is from the father saying that he wants to spend Christmas as like a united family. And David is like, my dad is being so manipulative. This is some kind of setup. Hilda's like, no, maybe he's getting older. Maybe he's getting sentimental. And I love this because her argument is kind of like the hallmark, but it's Christmas. Maybe people change. And this is where we get this thing. She's like, people can change. He's getting old. He's getting sentimental. You're just creating this monster out of your dad. It's all in your head. And she's like, David, you need to go. And she says, lay the bogey once and for all. So basically, like, you need to go and deal with your past.
She has different intentions, but in almost the opposite way of Lydia. But what they're both asking their husbands to do is somewhat similar.
Yeah, like, be free of your father. Basically.
Right, exactly. Yeah, be free. And in Hilda's case, be free of your messed up memory of him. Yeah. You need to go confront that. And in Lydia's case, can we just get the hell out of here?
Can we please leave? So, oh my God.
Yeah.
I have that feeling a lot where I'll like whisper to my husband, can we go now? And usually the answer is yes, but I can't imagine if that was our whole life together. And I think it's important. A key to love, I think if your partner says, I think we should leave, I'm not having fun,
you leave.
Yeah.
You leave. And you don't go, really?
It's like, nope, we're gone. Grab coats. Where do you want to go next? Can we get some pizza on the way home? And this segues so nicely into the final dysfunctional couple that we're going to meet. Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny because like we had talked about at the beginning, we're like, the first chapter, there's always this cast of characters. We have to learn about the town. We are getting this. It's kind of the same thing, but there is this like more like sweeping sense. Like the world is bigger and there's tension. Every scene is just rife with a decision that has to be made, a messed up past, and also these really dysfunctional dynamics between the couples. And so it's really like intoxicating right away.
Yeah.
With all the mystery, with all the like, what's the dad doing? And then we also just have these like 2 mystery people like slowly arriving on a train, which is like such a great sense of foreboding, I guess.
And the 2 mystery people are both hot.
And they're, oh my God, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
How are they going to spice things up?
Right.
So we get another kind of description of these characters. George, we learned he's a local MP. We learned he's corpulent. He's 41 years old, and his pale blue eyes, she said they look suspicious. And he has a heavy jowl and a slow, pedantic utterance. So there's no real saving grace with his description. He doesn't get a lot of nuance. She's just like, he's the guy, kind of unsavory. But then this is in contrast to Magdalene, who is slender, blonde. She has plucked eyebrows, but she has a smooth egg-like face. And we've heard that smooth egg-like face people are boring British people.
Yep. Yep. And who's going to argue with Stephen and Pilar?
I know. Yeah. Solid sources that we can turn to for the truth. Which is so funny because I was actually thinking about it. And I feel like now people be like, an egg-like face? Ooh, like what kind of skincare do you have? Your skin sounds so smooth. But it is not desirable. And so they're also discussing, should they go to this family event? Again, we're dropped right in. And I love Magdalene. She's like, it will be grim, but Christmas is grim anywhere. And so I was like, I'm with you. It is depressing. So she's like, we might as well be depressing in this specific way. We also learned that they're like running low on money because George is like, oh, well, if we could go away, then like we wouldn't have to ask our household staff to do as much and we could really like save a lot of money. And so we also learned that he's very dependent on his father. We learned that Mr. Lee is a multi-millionaire and he made a lot of money from the South African diamond trade, which, as we know, has a long...
He's totally above board and not at all problematic.
Yeah, a long legacy of ethics that we're still feeling today. Then Magdalene is like, so what happens if your dad dies? And I like how straightforward she is. And he's like, well, I think that most of the money would probably go to me and Alfred. And he's like, and, some might go to, and then we learn about the last sibling, Jennifer, who had a daughter and she married someone from Spain, but she died. Dun, dun, dun. And there is someone from Spain headed to Gorston Hall right now. And so, so she's kind of like, let's just have a thought experiment and think about your dad dying. How does this solve our financial problems?
We're seeing that Alfred stayed home and then George did what his father wanted him to do and went into politics. So George is just assuming that when the old man kicks it, that it's going to be Alfred and him because, of course, the dad prefers them because of like how they've done things the way that he would want them done. And that could not be further from the truth.
Yeah, there's no way to win with this man. There's no way to meet your parents' expectations, which is maybe a lesson everyone can learn. We free you of your parents' expectations. Don't be a George or an Alfred.
No, don't be a George or an Alfred. Also, don't be a Harry either, honestly.
Maybe be like a Hilda or...
Yeah.
Well, we get Magdalene. She's also expressing some kind of like what we talked about with like needing to leave. She's also expressing some discomfort, which George brushes off. And I think this also can go into our relationship advice column, which is if a man makes, or if anybody makes your spouse uncomfortable, also maybe listen to it.
Yeah.
She's like, your dad says things to me when people aren't around. So we can get the sense, she's young and beautiful. We get the sense that he's like sexually harassing her and like saying really inappropriate comments. So she's like, I really don't like being around him. Like, please don't put me through this. She's like, okay, and can you tell me again, do you think your dad is healthy or do you think he's going to live for a long time?
Right. Yeah. There's a couple ways to look at that, which is also like, I would like to not be harassed anymore. So when he dies, that will stop. Yeah. But then there's also the money part too.
And so they're like, okay, after all that, we will go. But Magdalene, she's like, and I really hate Hornbury because he sneaks around like a cat. And Lydia snubs me. So we also get the sense of the dynamics between these people. And we haven't really had that before, that like nobody really likes Hornbury and Lydia and Magdalene might have some tension. And then we end their little scene. Magdalene has gone to a different room and she pulls out this pile of bills. So we get the sense that not only is George in financial distress, but she's also hiding maybe the extent of her financial distress. And she's like, what on earth am I to do? Dun, dun, dun.
Everybody's got a reason this season.
Mr. Lee must die.
I think this book could have either been called Mr. Lee Must Die or Poor Lydia. One of the two.
Yeah, that's the subtitle. Now we get to meet the man that is the center of everyone's conversations. We're back in Gorston Hall. We meet Mr. Lee, and we get this really interesting description. It's almost like I kind of imagine like if the narrator were a film camera, we're like going through all the hallways of the house, and she describes all the furniture and everything. It's very opulent, but it's old fashioned too. It's like not modern. She says it was magnificent, costly, and solid. It's not fragile. The whole house is like strong. In the most imposing chair of the house, so I almost imagine it as like throne-like, we get a quote, shriveled old man with claw-like hands, yellowed skin, and he's holding a gold walking stick. Wow.
Yeah.
He sounds like he is maybe just as bad as everyone is saying. I kind of was thinking too about like the house is this like reflection of his old self. Like he used to be strong. He used to be magnificent. But now he's like shriveled and bitter and mean. The whole book, we have to start listening to the descriptions of people and who sounds similar to who. So he has dark, intensely alive eyes, fire and life and vigor. So we get the sense that like inside he's spunky. He is also a big cartoon. He's like cackling and like rubbing his hands together like ha 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 when he learns that Lydia has learned about the two other guests. So like, yes, her guess was true. He's trying to mess with her. He's trying to cause anxiety and distress. He summons Lydia and Alfred. He beckons for them. He's like, it's going to be a grand Christmas for me.
Yeah.
So, and this is where we get the sense of how no matter who you are as his kids, it doesn't matter. He calls George a gas bag. He calls David a namby-pamby. And he says there was never an honest Lee yet. So he kind of casts doubt on everyone, calling everyone dishonest. And he says only one of his children has taken after him. And right after that, he says, and the young lady who's joining us is Jennifer's daughter, and her name is Pilar. So our guest confirmed she does have a reason beyond hating British people. Alfred is so surprised, and he's like, what? You're bringing her here? And the father is just like eating it up. He loves it, and he's grinning. And he's excited for young blood in the house. All he's trying to do here is escalate everyone else's anxiety and discomfort. Like an energy vampire. He's just like feeding off of how miserable he's making them. And he's like, all of the children will be at Christmas. And they're like, Harry too? And Alfred is like horrified that Harry's invited. And also they switch now, not calling him Mr. Lee. And I think that's because we've been introduced to all the sons who would also be named Mr. Lee. So here he's referred to Simeon.
Old Simeon.
He's kind of interchangeably Mr. Lee or Old Simeon. He kind of perverts the cliche of like Christmas is the season for forgiveness. And he's kind of using that guise of like all of the Christmas joy and happiness. And he's like, I'm going to use this as an excuse to make everyone miserable and to like just set all my children against each other. Lydia is really mad, but she tries to control herself. And he starts egging her on, the less she's reacting. And so we end, everybody leaves, and we get this scene of Simeon alone in his dark room with his big chair, and he goes and he opens up a safe.
And he takes out a little sack of something.
Yeah, a little sack of something, and then he opens it up, and we learn, should we reveal it now, or is it revealed in the quote? Let's see.
Oh, let's reveal it now.
Okay, so he pulls out this bag of diamonds.
Uncut diamonds.
Yeah.
Just raw diamonds.
Uh-huh. And he just starts kind of like running them through his fingers and like talking to them. And so, Chad, would you please read to us what he says to his little diamonds?
Of course. When you're hearing this, keep in mind how he just talked to his son and daughter-in-law.
Oh my gosh.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Well, my beauties, well, still the same, still my old friends. Those were good days, good days. They shan't carve you and cut you about, my friends. You shan't hang around the necks of women or sit on their fingers or hang on their ears. You're mine, my old friends. We know a thing or two, you and I. I'm old, they say, and ill, but I'm not done for. Lots of life in the old dog yet, and there's still some fun to be got out of life. Still some fun.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dum,
Oh my
dum,
gosh.
dum. Oh.
So,
okay.
wow.
And so this is also so brilliant,
mm-hmm.
but also completely expository, right? He's alone in the room. He's just caressing his treasures.
If there were any doubt, he kind of is like the Christmas golem. He loves his little precious diamonds.
Yep.
Feels more connected to these like literal like blood diamonds than he does his own blood.
Yep.
So the day ends there. We will pick back up with December 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have anything else we want to say before we go?
I don't think so. Although one of my partners just dropped off a piece of mail for me, Caitlin.
Okay.
You know what? I'll open this next episode. I'll open it next episode.
Ooh, okay. We have a mysterious letter, perhaps some mysterious summonings.
You know, who knows what's in the letter? It's obviously completely coincidental that it arrived at the end of December 22nd.
Uh-huh. Yeah, but we have a note for you from us.
Right.
Let's be so cheesy. For more from Chad and Caitlin, follow Poirot Pals on Instagram at Poirot Pals and on the Substack app.
Guys, keep a lookout for our YouTube content and website coming soon. But wait, the YouTube channel is already up and it's running. And you can find this lovely podcast, Poirot Pals, and another podcast right now at Before Dark Podcasts on YouTube.
Yay. So go there and tell your friends who are like, I don't listen to podcasts, but I listen to them on YouTube or whatever. You can be like, well, the time has come. You can listen to Poirot Pals now. And you can check out our other shows on the Before Dark podcast networks, such as Special Lady Day and much more coming soon, wherever you get your podcasts.
Wow. What a great book so far. Amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess I'll see you on December 23rd.
Yes. And poor Lydia.
I know. Poor Lydia. Okay. Bye.